Greetings, everyone. This is the second of the videos that I had promised you that I was going to make while I was out sick. Looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow, Friday. Today, what I have for you is our, sorry, I was just flipping the pages there, is our readings on Hayek and Isaiah Berlin. That was the two concepts of liberty and selections from the Road to Serfdom. So, apologies, I'm going to do a better job today in terms of keeping the pace going. I was really struggling yesterday, but so at the outset of the 20th century, we had talked about how there was a real tension between those who were trying to hold on to that idea of a limited government, who, especially in the economic realm, left the sphere of economic activity alone, and those who believed that you could use the power of the state to improve economic performance, if you want to optimize or increase it. Now, the belief in centralization as a solution to society's problems was very seductive for several reasons, and strengthening the capacities of the state was very closely tied to the highly competitive polycentric geopolitical situation in Europe, where you had essentially that high tension of competition between the states and between the blocs that was building up in the late 19th century that I've mentioned to you many times in the past. But this is what is driving all of these states toward adopting these various methods of state planning and centralization and government control. So apart from that general milieu in which these actors were making decisions, you also had the promise of efficiency, that it would be a more efficient way to organize society. You could coordinate resources better, direct efforts better, enforce compliance with what you view as rational policies. There was also an appeal to justice. Advocates of centralization, people like John Dewey, for example, in the United States, were huge fans of a strong state because they believed that only the strong state could ensure their idea of fairness and redistribute resources and protect vulnerable populations. So when you take all of those things together, the argument for security, the argument for efficiency, and the argument for morality / equality, it was a pretty powerful selling point there. And of course, we were in the progressive era there. The United States was very much caught up in that as well. So I told you that we were going to jump past the war. Berlin here and Hayek are both going to be interested in addressing this tension, this balance between freedom and authority, and we're going to see how they both tackle this. So Berlin is here in his two concepts of liberty. What we're interested in here, again, this is only a survey level course, is his distinction between negative and positive liberty. Concepts that he feels reveal a fundamental tension within liberalism. But as I go through this, I want you to keep in mind that divergence that we talked about several lectures back, right around the time of Bentham, I believe it was, where I said liberalism, quote unquote, is going to, technically speaking, start to bifurcate into two different branches of an original stream, if you will. And that classical liberalism, which is the original liberalism, is going to be the smaller, weaker stream that eventually basically dies by the end of the 19th century. Morley in England is the last one to serve in a cabinet. The fellow who was at Sumner at and I believe he's at Harvard. He was one of the last great American classical liberals. They're not there in the 20th century. And then progressive liberalism, which becomes the dominant strain everywhere to this day. You have some pullback there, but some moves to grant more freedoms and whatnot. But the assumptions of progressive liberalism will be very familiar here. So Berlin defines these as positives and negative liberties. So negative liberty is the absence of interference. It's the freedom to act as one chooses, constrained only by the need to respect the rights of others. So this is that foundational concept of classical liberalism, right? Individual autonomy and limited government. But then he also identifies this thing called positive liberty, which is the freedom to realize one's potential and to achieve self-mastery. But critically, for Berlin, it often implies the need for external support, things like education, healthcare, economic security, to create the conditions necessary for these individuals to flourish. So, where do these things come from? Well, if you don't have them, and no one will give them to you through charity, you may be tempted to use the state to take those resources from someone else to redistribute to you. And so while Berlin is supportive of redistributive policies, he does recognize that there is an inherent danger in this. And this is a theme that we'll see over and over and over, is you'll have these thinkers who acknowledge that, yes, this is a slippery slope, but we do feel that these positive liberties exist. But of course, the danger here, which Berlin explicitly lays out, is, of course, the potential is that positive liberty can be used to justify coercion, right? If the state decides, for example, what constitutes a person's true interests, it may impose its vision of a good life, quote unquote, in the name of liberation. It also might require the coercion of taking the property of other people, taxes, to give to other people to help realize their own individual betterment. So, that's Berlin there. That is Berlin. I mean, I'm not going to go into them too much. I mean, it's because we did spend a good deal of time when we introduced utilitarians talking about the difference between classical liberalism and progressive liberalism, and how from here on out, I said, eventually we're going to get to the point where it's really just people arguing about exactly how much the government should control your life. And Berlin is one of those. He's lived through the experience of the totalitarian regimes of Hitlerian Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. So he realizes that it's dangerous to give the state too much power, but he's also one of those people who believes that the state can be used to raise the society and the economy and the people, and that it is a tool for social engineering. So that is, I'm not going to, I accidentally dragged that other video off for almost 40 minutes. I'm trying to be cognizant of this. So let's move on to Hayek. So one thing I want to say about Hayek first is one of his most famous contributions was this observation about local knowledge. And so one of the things that he was really famous for was saying, look, and this was a long time before it was obvious, central planning, everyone was enamored of social planning. Social planning, really, the highly bureaucratized, socialized state, which originated in Bismarckian Germany. Remember, I told you he was the one who first created the welfare. He was the pioneer of the welfare state, the old Prussian aristocrat. Germany was an incredibly powerful state. Everything was very streamlined. The education system was very top-notch. A lot of American academics were doing their PhDs in Germany because there weren't PhDs in the United States. So a lot of them went and did university in Germany. So that was another contributing factor there. But these ideas were being inculcated there. But there too, the Germans just seemed to be very organized. Things ran really well. If you just know anything about the First World War, which don't worry, I'm not going to get into it here, but like They basically defeated the Russians, defeated the minor powers in the Balkans, and then fought Britain and France, and would have definitely won without American intervention. All while carrying Austria and having to like help prop them up against like minor powers like Italy and stuff. It's pretty incredible what they've done. So the clear power of using the state as an instrument of policy was very attractive. But Hayek rightly observed several things. So, sorry, I scrolled too far. Yes, okay. So, apart from the potential political problems that come from centralizing too much power in a single authority, apart from any philosophical problems, there's also this practical knowledge problem. And this was that no central authority could ever possess enough information to necessarily plan an economy effectively. Markets, Hayek argues, work precisely because they aggregate dispersed knowledge through the price mechanism. And this turns out to be a very prescient observation. Central planners just lack the ability to gather and process the immense, ever-changing data required to make informed decisions. It's one of the reasons that the communist economies just over the long haul of the Cold War were just vastly outstripped by the liberal capitalist democracies. It just wasn't even close. So just look at West Germany and East Germany. So, and then of course there was his philosophical critique, which comes from The Road to Serfdom, where he talks about central planning inevitably requires coercion, because invariably people aren't necessarily going to agree. Some number of them are not going to agree. And so the state, in order to execute his plan, must suppress dissent, regulate behavior, control resources, and the slope is very slippery towards authoritarianism from there. So that is the road to serfdom. Ironically, Hayek did in a later book, The Constitution of Liberty, open the door to precisely that kind of meddling, which in The Road to Serfdom he had very, very much kept closed. Later in the Constitution of Liberty, he had a chapter in there about the welfare state, essentially. So just kind of interesting to see how that wound up changing slightly in his thinking, but so. Couple of other interesting here's what I want to leave you with here. So crisis thinking. Both Hayek and Berlin recognize that crises are often used to justify the expansion of state power, as people demand solutions to some problem. But Hayek especially warned that temporary measures often become permanent, and the concentration of power during the crisis will have long-term consequences. And I would just want to recommend to you all a book by the Independent Institute's Robert Higgs, Crisis and Leviathan, Critical Episodes in the Growth of State Power. It's very important to understand that crisis has often been the ticket to giving the government more power. And I'm going to close here with Carl Schmitt, who I told you I was going to bring up, because there's going to be one question on the exam on Carl Schmitt. Now, if you remember, I said Carl Schmitt was actually, he was a German jurist, but he was a Nazi. But the reason I mention this here is he believed that because it was already obvious to him in the 1930s, Higgs didn't write his book until 84. I think he started writing it in 80 and finished it in 84. But he's writing about the period from 1860 to about 1880, right about there. So there was plenty of historical time for Schmidt to have already looked back on. And he said, look, it's obvious that whatever these quote-unquote constitutional, limited government, whatever, when a crisis happens, they just rip up the Constitution and just do whatever needs to be done. And he called this the state of exception. And this is really, I think, where the death of liberty lies, is that if the Constitution doesn't actually matter in a moment of crisis, then it's not really a Constitution at all. I've mentioned in class before, the Constitution is just a piece of paper. You have to have a society that is willing to defend it. And so if in a crisis you are willing to trade the precious freedoms that you had for security, you are going to wind up, with neither. So Carl Schmitt, State of Exception, Isaiah Berlin, Positive and Negative Liberties, and then Hayek, the problem of local knowledge, the knowledge problem, and the road to serfdom. So I succeeded in keeping this one short. Don't worry, I will go over all of this in our big review before the exam. I will see you all tomorrow.